I got these little prickly things here that poke me. Good place to stop, I suppose, but we're going to tear this whole front thing apart and try to do a bunch of stuff. And then we're going to go and do it on the other side. Hopefully it works this time. This is my third try at this down the road, and hopefully the third time's a charm. For the record, this is not how you work on vehicles, and I'm not comfortable at all doing this. If anyone is actually interested in this procedure, I am going to try and document this side a little better. We're up on a jack right there, pretty much as high as we can go, because we've got to get this control arm, which is your lower arm here. We've got to get that to go down as far as we can to the ground to get that spring out. While we're here, we're also replacing the wheel hub on this side, which has the internal bearings. So you can't service it, you replace the whole thing. And that will be that hub and this line right here, which is the ABS sensor line. But I'm going to try to document this procedure on this side a little better for people who may be interested. I've already taken the wheel off. The next thing we're taking off is this component here, which is your wheel spacer for the 3500. Chevy Express 3500 or Savannah 3500, and that's your dually spacer deal. And so if it was like a 2500 or something like that, I do believe that it wouldn't have that. So to remove this, we're going to start with a screwdriver, and we're locking that down into the gaps on the rotor, and that locks this from spinning so we can loosen these. And there are 8 of these, and that is a 21 millimeter. And what we do is we slide that in from the side, and then you have a ratchet with an extension. That goes into here, and then you loosen one, and then you take the extension out, manually put the bolt over to the next, put the extension in, and you go all the way around in a circle to take these off. But yeah, you have to put the socket in and then go through this access hole with your extension. So I'll bring you back once that's done. We've got those bolts off. This just pulls out like that. Set that down here, and then this is your rotor, this is your wheel bearing hub assembly, and this is your brake. So in order to get this off, we have to take the brake off. And if we come back behind here, you've got a large bolt right here. And down on the bottom, there's another large bolt that matches that right here. I know it's tight with the camera, so it's hard to get in there, but the upper and the lower, you pull those 2 bolts out, and this whole caliper assembly will come off, and we'll put it over here out of the way, and then we can get our rotor and hubs. So it'll be right there in a minute. Before I get ahead of myself, we have our brake line here, which attaches to our knuckle assembly. That's a 10 millimeter bolt. We're going to take that out, and that's a 10 millimeter bolt. We're going to take that out. That'll free up our brake line, and then we're going to put our brake caliper over here and hook it up with a bungee cord so that it can't fall. But so we get some more play in here and have room to move this around, we're going to take these 2 10 millimeters off. Flip that over. And this is our speed sensor that goes to our hub. This is also hooked to this bracket, which just squeezes that, will come out. So we're going to unhook this. This one's been zip tied, but I don't think that's the proper way to do that. And it goes up to here, and then there's right behind here, there's a little connector. You can barely see it. It's the blue thing there. We're going to unhook that from this point. From this point, everything below gets replaced with the new hub, and this is lying in front of our brake line, so we're going to go ahead and pull that out of the way. And this is that cable, and that just plugs in. The attachments here, worth noting, these push into little holes in the frames. If you're reusing this, you'll want to be careful and gentle with that. Probably unhook these and leave the bracket attached in place and just unhook the wire. But since we are replacing this whole thing, this is garbage for us. So that's there. Now let's secure this brake over here. Now we have our brake is out of the way, and here's our rotor, and this just slides off. It's heavy, but it slides off. There we go. And there's our hub bearing assembly. This also has this dust shield that'll come off, and this is held on by 4 bolts through the back. Let's see if we can find them. 1, 2, and then 2 on the other side. The bottom 2 are stripped out on here, same as on the other side. The bottom 2 are stripped because they're frozen in there. And I've tried PB Blaster and heating and all kinds of stuff to get that to come loose. So we may end up having to actually cut and grind into this and cut that out. But to access these is around the back. This one here and this one here. You got it to get this one. You've got to turn the steering all the way to the left, and to get the one on the other side, you have to turn the steering all the way to the right, and then just getting those 4 bolts out. This vehicle is from the Northeast, so it's been exposed to road salt and all that stuff. So these stripped out, and they're in there. I went to the dealership and they wanted like $130 for the 8 bolts to buy new bolts. So I went to a junkyard and found one that hadn't been in salty conditions in the Southwest, and I got those 8 bolts for I think like $14 including tax. So I do have new bolts to put in those, or newer, better bolts to put in those. But yeah, this right here, we may have to put a grinder in there and cut that out on each side if our bolt extraction doesn't work. And this is a 15 millimeter. I put some PB Blaster in there just for fun, but these right here I've actually taken out twice on my first 2 attempts to change this. Yeah, it's just that little end right there. You get a little rusty corrosion in there, and it freezes this whole bolt up, and whatever they're making this bolt out of, that head will strip before those few threads right there will free. It's really annoying. But we'll get the top 2 out, and then we'll have to turn the steering to get the bottom 2. Now I've turned this to get access to this one, and then I've turned it the other way to get access to that one. But see if I can focus in on this real quick. This is my extractor socket for stripped. If you look at those teeth, look closely at those teeth, you'll see that when doing the other side, it actually rounded over that edge. That edge shows pretty good right there. It rounded the edge over on this socket where it's got those biting teeth that go backwards. It basically, taking one bolt out, ruined this socket. So this socket set, I'm not going to put any advertisement or anything like that for it because obviously it's not high quality. It'll be going back for a refund because it's junk. But if this doesn't work, then we're going to go and we'll put the grinder and we'll cut right in here, and we'll cut right through that bolt with the grinder, and do the same on the other side if we have to. And that'll get rid of those where it's seized on these last few threads. We'll cut those last few threads out, and then that bolt will come out. Now I've got that on there, and I've got this bar for some extra leverage. Now we're going to see if she spins. Oh, she's moving. I can see. Saw a little movement right there. I guess we still have enough grip on these teeth to make that happen. Cool. I'll get this one the rest of the way out, and I'll bring you back for the other side. This one's harder to see, but it is right there. And we're going to try to get that socket on there and see what this one does. Maybe we'll get lucky and it'll spin it. Now set up on this side, and this is the one we're watching. I don't know if you guys can see it. I'll try to leave you right there. See if we can catch it spinning or not. Yep, it spun. I don't know, you're kind of in a shadow there, so I don't know if you can see it. But that is free. We don't have to cut and grind. Good times. Okay, but yeah, I mean, if you have to with these things, if you put your grinder right in here, you can cut through that bolt. Where's the last one we just pulled out? This is the last bolt we just pulled out. My phone just shut off for no reason, but that's the last bolt we pulled out. And it's those last couple threads in there that are seizing, and it's actually stripping out the whole bolt. And you can see those last couple threads, most of that, like to there, is sticking on the outside. So it's really like 3 turns that are making that whole bolt seize. So if that seizes up, you cut it right towards the edge, you cut it right in there, and you basically cut all that off, and then that bolt just comes right out. And now this whole thing will come out. May have to tap it with a hammer a little bit to free it up, but this, so we get this just goes back behind this dust shield, and this dust shield will fall off with the, we're gonna have to, there it goes. Okay, dust shield fell off. There's your wheel hub assembly. That's all one piece. And we'll clean this up. You can see there's a rubber O-ring in here that I'm assuming helps with probably more. I'm not exactly sure. I'm speculating, but I think this O-ring, maybe it helps weather seal it a little bit. It probably also helps with any like vibration dampening or something perhaps. But we'll clean this out. Now this, everything we've done here, this, if you're changing out the wheel hub, that's where you can stop, and then you put the new hub in and you just do everything backwards that we did. But we're getting that coil spring out, and to get that out, we've got to do our ball joints and our tie rod have to come out, and we've also got back behind here the sway bar. We've got to get that out too. And one thing I didn't mention is we're loosening up this sway bar where it attaches to the frame on the front, those 2 brackets there. We're going to loosen that whole assembly up, and then once we get both sides down, we'll set it down and then we'll retighten that up. And let's not forget, once this is all done, it has to go in and get an alignment. It'll eat up tires because it's going to throw everything off. But yeah, tie rod, ball joints. This here, if you look at my little shock, I forget what that's called, but this thing is like gone. It's deteriorated beyond belief. I'm getting new ones of those, but I don't have them today. But anything with that, if you want to replace your ball joints, tie rods, any of that stuff, while you're doing this and while you're spending a bunch of money and you've got everything torn apart, this is a great time to just go and do like some major extensive, front end work if it needs it. But not today for us. Tie rod, 21 millimeter. And this here, we'll get this bolt out. It's important not to lose the bolts. Always have somewhere safe to put the bolts. Sometimes you can take them and put them back on afterwards. Once you get it free, put it back on. These here, you're supposed to be able to tap on the side, and that's supposed to come out. Which hasn't been my experience, so sometimes I give them a little love tap right there, and that's out of the way. Good time to replace these if you're going to. I'm going to put this nut back on top of here so it doesn't get lost. Then we're going to work on this guy. This right here is actually a nut. There isn't really a, I mean, there's a little bit of, I don't know if you can get close sniffing on that. It's got little edges that go around. I basically put a pair of vice grips on that, and then you come down underneath, and that's a 15 millimeter right there. So vice grips on the top, 15 millimeter on the bottom, and we unscrew that. There's your vice grip, and there's your 15, and we're just going to unscrew this. Now we're on to the lower ball joint, and we aren't going to take this nut all the way off. We're going to loosen it most of the way, but we're going to leave it still attached. So when we unhook the top and everything, there's a lot of tension built up in the spring and whatnot. But we don't want We don't want to go crazy on anything. We don't want anything to drop. So we will loosen this one almost all the way, and then we'll take the upper ball joint all the way. The nut for the upper ball joint is 18 millimeters, and the bottom is 24. So we've got that one. That's just sitting there loose, ready to pop once it goes. And now we're gonna get the upper. Now I've got that loosened, but I didn't let it go because we're gonna compress this spring a little. I've got our compressors here, which are loaners from Advance Auto, and they gave me ones for strut compression, which is not the right thing. It's actually a smaller coil on a strut. These worked for the other side and they'll work here, but you really do want to make sure that you have this right tool. It'll make it easier. Now you can do what we're doing with this and put that leveler / lifter in. You can put that in without compressing the string. It's just a little harder to get everything squished back together to bolt everything down. So we're going to use these very carefully because they're the wrong tool, and we're just going to be careful with that. Now there are two of these, one will go on each side, and this just turns at the bottom with a 3/4 inch wrench to tighten these down. Not really going to cover that a whole lot because this is actually the wrong tool, and I don't want you to use the wrong tool, but the principle is there. You lock it in, and then you're going to turn this here and squish them. And there's two of these. I'm going to go ahead and undo our shocks. That's a 9/16 up top, and I don't have the measurement for the bottom one yet. And that's the bottom of the shock, and these two bolts are 1/2 inch. And with this hanging in the air, it's loaded a little bit. Pull myself out front. There's some load on that, so when I unhook it, it's going to want to drop a couple inches. So I probably will put a jack under here just to control that. Here I've got that jack under our steering knuckle, and that's just taking a little tension off of that while I take that shock out. Otherwise, when I undo that, the top nut and everything will just go pow and it'll fly somewhere. So that's just to release a little bit of pressure, and then we'll take that jack out of there. The shock is now out, and we're going to go ahead and hook the steering knuckle. We're going to take these ball joints off of that now. The upper is freed, and the lower is still holding on that so it doesn't drop all the way, but it hasn't popped loose. So we're going to hit that with a hammer to get that to free up so that we can take this out. There we go, it's dropped, and you can see it didn't fall off on the ground because the one's still bolted there, but there's our spring. If you may have noticed, I took the other one of these out. I couldn't get a good angle on it. It was hitting, I don't know if you can see that mark right there, it was hitting on that housing for that, so I took that off, and now that I have this out of the way, I'm going to put that back and compress that down. The big point there is it's going to make it easier for me to get it back up in there and reinstall. So that's my next step. I'm going to put that compressor back on this side and then pull that spring out. On the bottom here, where the spring terminates, good idea to keep an eye on that. I mean, you can see it's formed into this. That looks a little rough, but it's formed into where there's a stop for that spring, so you want to make sure you're getting this back in the same place that it was. So keep an eye on that, mark it, whatever you got to do, that's important. The next step is to just manhandle this thing and pull it out. We'll push down on this control arm here. We'll push down on this a little bit with a pry bar, lock it into here and pry that down to get that to go a little further, and then this will just fall out. Maybe hard to see with the shade and my shadow in here, but there's your pry bar going into here, and then there's your spring. And if you see, when I push down on this, that spring just bounces. So we're just going to hold this down and pull that out. I need 2 hands to do it, so you can't watch. There's our spring, and it's got this little squishy plastic piece on here. I guess that's a dampener / holder. But let's grab the insert that goes right there. Here she is in all her aluminum milled glory. Now, I look at some of these things online before making this purchase, and they've got some of them that are just like a, I don't know, a U-shape, not a full circle, that I guess just would like clip onto part of that. And I went with this one just because it's beefier, it's a lot more substantial. I mean, it's a lot heavier duty piece, and I'm a lot more comfortable with that. So that is the reason I went with that one. But this just sits right on top and just taps in right there, and that's all there is to it. Now we have to put everything back together, and you see that adds a couple inches to the height of the spring, and that's why I have these, that's why I'm compressing it a little bit, so that it'll make it, getting it back up into that space, it'll make that a little bit easier because we're going to be taller now. So now this is setting back in its hole. You can see the shiny part right there, and the bottom of the spring, setting that up in that groove where it needs to be. It's pretty close, it's almost perfect, but we'll adjust that just a little bit. And now we've got to get this whole control arm jacked back up. What the experts say to do is to put a floor jack under here, because you've only got a couple inches of clearance on the ground. Put a floor jack under there and squish all this back, jack it all up and squish it all back together into place. But I don't have a floor jack in my back pocket, so we're going to get a little creative on this with a shovel and that jack and a ratchet strap. Yeah, that's what we'll do. So I've put this ratchet strap, and these are lock-in ones, and I know it looks pretty rough, but it's actually pretty new. It's just a lot of engine grease on it from doing the other side. But you want a good sturdy strap. But that's going into the lower control arm, and then coming up here and locking onto that upper arm. And as I jack this up, I will use this ratchet strap to hold my movement in place while I reposition my jack. So I let the jack out, then it falls back. It's just a placeholder while I utilize the jack that I do have, and it's very helpful. If you don't have a floor jack, this is a way to do it. But ideally, you put a floor jack under there and you just pop it right up, and then you slap everything back together. This will take longer, but it's I'm working with what I have. Now I have placed this jack under here. You see the top of it, grabbing that little lip. And I'm going to lift this bottom arm up a little bit, and then I will reposition this ratchet strap, and I will also be taking these guys out. And it's going to be a little process. I'll have to reposition this a couple times, but it will all bring it all back together. Here's an important thing to note. This is your shock, and that's your lower shock mount. If you go back in this video, you'll see where we undid these, and this right here mounts to the bottom of this. You see that little screw sticking up right there and right there? That's where your shock mounts on the bottom. With this spacer, you have to get your shock up above here, and these little bolts right here, these little bolts have to be fed in from the top. I'm taking one out real quick. So you've got to get your shock up in here, inside the coil obviously, but you've got to get this above that. And then you have to put your screws in from the top going down, because this standard shock is a little bit too short. I guess your other option, if you didn't want to do that, is to go buy a longer shock to go in here. But by far the hardest part of this whole project has been getting these two guys in here and getting them screwed in. Getting kind of wrench on there to screw them in and tighten them down. That really was a bear. But I just wanted to point that out while we're here. I've got this. It's coming together. back off just a little for a second. Coming together. See that? You got about 6 inches more to raise that up, and then we'll be good. But it's time to adjust our strap, reposition our jack, and keep going up. We've now positioned ourselves, repositioned that jack, and this is our goal right here, is to close that 6-inch gap to get that put back together. So we're going to continue jacking this up with one hand while aligning this into the hole with our other hand. This is up where we want it. See, our threads are there. So now we can get our bolt started. On this bottom one here, it's really hard to see in the daylight messing with things, but this one right here, we never took all the way off. So we'll tighten this guy up, and we'll tighten this guy up, and that'll get our steering knuckle back in place and ball joints tightened. Steering knuckles are back together, or ball joints and steering knuckle back together, and now we're working on this connecting rod to the sway bar. We're putting that back in. Now it's time to squeeze this shock back in and get everything going with that. And I'll go up into this center tube in the middle, and that's, turn this around at the bottom. I can see what I'm doing a little bit. So if you look up here, that's what shows through the top, and by the time you put this washer and this rubber spacer and everything there, by the time you put that back in, you'll never get a thread started on the bolt, on the nut that goes on the top. So that is why you either need longer shocks, or you've got to get this thing above these mounts, which is almost there. I'll need 2 hands to do it. So now that is above. Got to reposition them a little bit, but you look up here, see how much room that gives you for the top. So we will go ahead and reassemble that. There we go. There we go. That leaves you plenty of room for your nut. Important thing here is don't over tighten this. You don't need to squish the heck out of these rubber pieces. That's good enough freehanding it for now, but we're not going to put very many more turns on that when it's done. But that's going to leave us a little play, and now we're going to get under here and try to finesse these bolts in. That's in. Next is our tie rod. That goes back into here. This should be painless. There we go. Now, some of these tie rods and ball joints, important little note here is if you look at this tip, this actually, you can put a wrench on that because this is free spinning. Sometimes when you go to tighten the nut, this whole thing will turn. So you put a pair of pliers or a wrench on that, and then you turn this, and it'll all come together. So now we are at the end of that lift/leveling procedure, and the only thing left would be set her on the ground and then tighten down your sway bar, which that's just this guy right here, and then there's another one all the way on the other side. We just tighten those after we set her down and stuff, and then she goes in for the alignment. But now we're going to continue on with that new wheel bearing hub. I've got my 4 bolts here for the wheel hub. There's our brake shield, and I put some grease in there just to make me happy. So I'm going to set 2 of these in, and then we have our little brake shield. Those 2 bolts will help hold that in place while I manhandle the axle assembly into place. And that is right here. And you see it comes with that new the new center lead and everything, and that goes to the top. So this is just going to slide into this thing, and then I've got to get the bolts lined up, so I'll bring you right back. I've hand started these two just a little bit, and this goes back behind that shield, and then this is going to clip into the brake back bracket. When I bring the brake bracket back, that's going to clip into there. But we're just going to set it up here out of the way for now, and we'll get this tightened. Wheel hub is in. Still laying loose with this because we need to get our bracket back in, but before we can do that, we have to put our rotor back on, and then we need that dually spacer thing. So I'm going to put those two on, and I'll come right back to you. So those are back on. Next, brake assembly back on. The fact that we've taken it apart, we may put a C-clamp on here. Take the pads out and put a C-clamp on there to squish those cylinders in a little bit so they will slide over and back into place a little. If needed, we'll do that. It's just something to be aware. You may want to have a C-clamp just to make it easier to actually get that to slide on. Brakes are back in. Tighten this back up, tighten this back up. Now we've got this cable, and that's got that little hook. Probably pay attention to where the camera's actually aiming. Now that hook's in. I'm all wrapped up in things. It's all just wrapped up in here. Okay. That comes across, and there's a little hole right there, and that just pops in. And then this one comes across. Sorry, the camera's a little out of whack there. Camera operator's a little out of whack there. That goes across. And there's another mount. Right, I can't see it, but it's right up here somewhere. There's another mount. And then the last one is the wire, where the wire harness goes. And you can't really see this one because they've got this other wiring harness right in the way. And I've got this thing dropped down under something somewhere. Okay, there's that. But there is another mounting hole somewhere in here. I'm going to have to feel for this one. There's a mount. There it is. Now that's in that last hole. And I can't really get a good camera on this for you guys, but then this just plugs in to the existing wiring harness. There's no good angle to get that kind of flying blind here. It's not quite going in with one hand, but anywho, might take two hands to get that to snug in, but that just plugs into there, and that's that. That took two hands, but I did get it done. So now we've got our screwdriver back in our rotor, and we're going to tighten the dually spacer guy. We're going to tighten these down. I do these, I alternate them just like you do in a tire. You alternate them so it seats properly, and you don't have any like wheel wobble or anything. But tighten these up next, and then put the wheel on, and then we've got to tighten down that sway bar up there, and that really is it. So if you followed along to this part, you should know how to do this.